it's really interesting to me, Johan, that sentence threw the students off so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it probably is a French thing as well. Getting into an argument on almost everything. But, it was really was something out of a movie. And the translator was really upset at the end there.
Well, and so, I'm just thinking about translating Pynchon into any other language. English has such a flexibility of grammar due to the lack of inflection.
Yeah.
And he plays with that so much. So the fact that that kind of thing gets translated over to Norwegian well at all is, that's a testament to the translator's talents.
Absolutely, and I think that is really where I'm in awe of it, because Norwegian has some flexibility, but you really have to. It makes a lot more noise when you try to bend it in a way. It doesn't have the same freedom of. Here's the thing: I don't read like a musician. Don't read music. I never learned all these fancy words for different in languages. I don't know the terms for it, but yeah, there's stuff in Norwegian you have to find a way to work around, and English seems to have more synonyms for a lot of words. But again, with Against It Is an example, you don't feel that language is lacking anything, and also being able to translate both the speaking patterns and sometimes the more rural vocabulary of a character, is able to do all that stuff, and the same with especially with the David Foster Wallace translation. There's Norwegian translator takes a lot of liberties when it comes to punctuation and the use of commas, because in Norwegian you'll throw in a lot more commas than you will do in English, which is something that I'm always a little bit jealous about. That in English, and especially in English, you're able to get the sentence flow for longer before you have to insert some sort of punctuation. But in Norwegian translation of Wallace, he sort of just throws a lot of that overboard and more or less follows the US punctuation rules without it looking out. It just works. So I think on a longer time scale, I think Norwegian will move closer to that as a natural thing. It's just my thought, because until like the 1940s or something, I think German was the biggest influence on Norwegian language. Since the Second World War, American English has been the biggest influence on Norwegian language, as well as the culture and everything. I definitely think Norwegian will be merging a little bit more to these rules.
It's definitely an interesting language. I've noticed as I've been learning it over the last year or so, there's a lot of, I don't want to say overlap, but there are a lot of words that I can clock a lot easier in Norwegian because they sound very similar to their American English counterpart. And then there's some that are just, so far off that I'm like, wow, that's okay. But I'll try to find a way for my brain to rewire and remember that word. But
yeah,
it's I think it's harder too. And I should backtrack and say, I don't know if I mentioned this in our emails, but the whole thing with me learning Norwegian really started because my wife is a teacher or a librarian at a school, and so she gets Duolingo for free. And my son last year challenged us to learn Norwegian was just the language he picked. And there was no reason for it that I could ever really determine, aside from he just spun a wheel and picked Norwegian. So I was like, all right. And I kind of vowed to stick with it because I wanted to show him like, yeah, I'm going to take this thing that I've never been good with learning languages. I took 2 years of Spanish in high school. I took a semester of Latin in college. I can barely remember any of it. But I'm really putting myself to it with learning Norwegian, and I've found kind of, I think the benefit of Duolingo, it's not maybe the greatest way to go about learning the language, and that's what I'm trying to kind of get away from and find other ways to immerse myself in it. But it makes it to where it's at least entertaining enough to want to keep learning it. I think the problem that a lot of people have is that they aren't willing to really put the time into it. They're just kind of going to do the bare minimum of it and keep up their daily streak or whatever the case may be. So they're only spending maybe 5-10 minutes at most with it in a day. And I've tried to make it a point, especially with the start of this year, to really use the app for one more, but to also kind of find different ways to consume or take in the language without necessarily having to understand it all. Like I found myself watching episodes of Norwegian Taskmaster and just keeping the subtitles on and trying to kind of catch the words that I know, but keep up with it at the same time. And just little things like that to make it more, get my brain to absorb it in different ways and try to, play with finding a way to learn it a little bit easier and better.
Are you still the last person in your house to keep learning it? Didn't you say everyone else gave up?
Kind of, yeah. My wife is doing multiple languages, and she's doing more. I think Spanish is the one that she's focusing more on. My son gave up. I don't even know how long ago. So it's I just kind of I just started enjoying it, and I was like, wow, I'm actually doing better at remembering a lot of this than I thought I would. And so it's become more of a challenge to myself of just like, oh, let's see how far I can take this. And so in a roundabout way, that's kind of to tie this back to your work, Johan. This is what got me to pick up the Red Handler. I was I talked about this in the bonus episode. I was in a bookstore in Dallas, just kind of browsing around. We did this whole road trip over the summer with my mom and my family. Just hitting up bookstores in the route that we took up to Kansas City and then back to San Antonio. And our first night was in Dallas, and I saw this book, and I'm kind of looking at it, and I'm reading the back of it, and it talks about this Norwegian author, and I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. And I start kind of flipping through it and looking at how it's laid out, and I'm like, okay, this really seems like something. And lo and behold, I ended up loving it and did my bonus episode on it and everything. I have to know, was this it seems like, and correct me if I'm reaching too much on this, but the conceit of this being, this author gets kind of frustrated after writing this monumental experimental novel called Conglomerate Breath that never got reviewed. Is this kind of an allusion to one of your works? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Max Misha and the Tet Offensive came out before this. Was this kind of like your own way of dealing with that, the monumental amount of work that you must have put into doing that book, and then just wanted to do something a little more of a step back from that kind of that reach of work that you would have to do for a novel of that size?
Well, both yes and no. The thing was that when I finished Max Misha and the Tet Offensive, I definitely felt like done my best work until now, and I was also completely exhausted, having spent 8 years from start to finish, not from all the false starts and also the book had, to my surprise and joy, been sort of a success, not necessarily in terms of sales, but and I immediately started writing another novel, and I quickly realized that I'm just writing the same novel again. I just really want to keep on going, because in my experience, it's in the final stages of a novel is where you learn how to write that novel, or whatever book you're writing. It's a collection of poems, poetry. doesn't matter. In the fan stages, you finally understand how to do it correct. And so I wanted to keep that energy and just keep going with it. But at the same time, I understood that I can't do that. I've finished this book. I can't read it again. And I had this friend of mine. He's a film director here in Norway, and he had been talking for quite some while, more or less as a joke, I think, that one day I'll write a book and it will be about this guy called the Red Handler and blah blah blah, and it would be like really really intense but short crime fiction. So the original idea came from him, and he was doing a movie at the time, which, speaking of David Lynch, it's called Now It's Dark, and it has a lot of Pynchon motifs. So while he was in pre-production with that movie, I decided to write a couple of short crime fiction stories in the Red Handler fashion. So perhaps he could use it for his movie or whatever. That didn't happen, but I did end up with having a short, very small cameo in that movie, playing the author of the Red Handler book.
Nice.
And to make a long story slightly shorter, I eventually just asked him, can I just take this and run with it? And he gave me permission. So I started writing more of these short stories, and then came up with the idea of the end notes, which for me really opened the book to be something more than just a joke. And I found, and this is the point where I'm getting at. I then found out that this is really what I need. This is so different from what I've been doing before. So this is like the antidote of that 1,000+ page novel, to try to write as bad as I possibly could, and also to try to write as short as I possibly could, and then having these end notes to defend all the crap stuff I wrote, and explaining it to be a work of absolute genius, which I urge every author to do at some point. To just whatever you want, and then argue that it's a great work of art. and since that, now that I finished another almost 1,000-page book, which I promised to everyone is the last. I'm not going to be the one who keeps writing 1,000-page novels. But I discovered that again I need to do something completely different in order to avoid writing the same book over and over again. So I'm currently trying to find out which way would be the biggest departure from where I was coming from. I haven't really found it out yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Red Handler is, this was my first experience with your work, and so once I finished that, I immediately was like, I need to go find more of this author's work. And like I said at the beginning of the wrap up episode, the only other ones that I can find that are available in English translation are 172 Hours on the Moon and Buzz Aldrin: What Happened to You in All the Confusion, which I grabbed Buzz Aldrin and absolutely devoured it. But I remember when I started it, I got about 100 pages in. I was like, wow, this is a very different novel, very differently written, very good, but very different. But and we'll wrap back around to that book here in a little bit, but I want to keep talking about the Red Handler, because genuinely, and Luke, I know you read it. I think you and I are the only ones that have read it so far. Genuinely is one of the funniest things I've read. It is incredibly hilarious. All these, sort of cliches and tropes that it's playing with as far as the detective novels, and it's like you mentioned, it's its own defense of itself in a way, of being this fantastic and phenomenal work. It's such a pleasure to read, and it's not something that I think that I've read some reviews online where people seem to just wildly miss the point and not understand that this is supposed to be a sort of joke and a sort of deconstruction of the genre. And it's kind of sad that they're missing out on this really wonderful read because they're just trying so
really
hard.
Bad crime fiction.
Yeah. They're like, this is just really poorly written. Like, what's going on? I'm like, well, that's entirely the point here. But yeah, it is very different from the only other of your work that I've read. But I can see how what you're talking about, how that is a good sort of palate cleanser and a way to move into the next thing that you're going to work on and still have some kind of creative output to work through and get everything on. So I really greatly enjoyed that book, and I tried to get as many people as I can come across to pick it up because it's just so good.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think that, Red Handler in a way is I don't know, it's like an alter ego, but it's a reform version of myself or something like that. Because I just wanted to, how should I say it? It sounds weird when I say it, as free as I could, because I definitely feel very free when I'm writing my other books, but it's just a book written by me, how I probably am, after 2 beers out on a bar or something. It's being ridiculous. And a lot of the books were written in the backyard of the building I'm living in, just on my iPhone. So that was the thing. That was the only rule I gave myself. Not for the end notes, which takes up half the book, but for the micro. I have to write them on an iPhone, and I can't edit. So whatever comes along stays, and but here's another thing which I find interesting, because you mentioned correctly that the only 2 other novels available are Buzz Aldrin and the 172 Hours on the Moon, which is a young adult novel, horror novel. It's strange to me to know that of my 10 or 11 books, 3 are the only ones that represents me in the US or in the English speaking world. It's strange selection of books. Buzz Aldrin probably being closest to my good novels, but still, it's and I really I'm glad to hear that you liked it. I haven't read it for close to 20 years, so after a while you get unsure, because it was written when I was 26 when it came out. But of course I do feel that my 2 other these very long books I mentioned, Max Misha and the Tet Offensive, and then the newest one which came out in August, The Paving Stones, The Beach, I would probably find them also very different from even Buzz Aldrin, or maybe not that different, but more complex in a way, or hopefully more well written. But I should also, maybe I'm jumping ahead. I'm thinking about since we're talking about Pynchon, that I should probably mention Under the Paving Stones, The Beach, for the novel being, of course, inspired by the called the epigraph. Is that the word? From Inherent Vice.
Yeah, I will say that is your book that I most want to read. So I hope that gets translated into English at some point in the future.
Yeah, we're working really hard with it, or hopefully my agent is working really hard with it. The Max Misha and the Tet Offensive book came pretty close, I think, and then COVID hit and everything shut down.
Oh, yeah. And
it and that made everything more difficult. And since that, there's been like a slow coming back for publishing houses. Sales worldwide seems to be going down. People are more and more interested in Netflix. But even before that, I think it's like 1% of fiction sold in the US is translated fiction. And that is translated fiction from all over the world. So
which is a real shame.
Yeah, you could probably say that, but I'm not sure how much translated fiction represents in Norway as compared to Norwegian fiction in Norway. Probably a little bit more, but even if it's 5%, it's still very little. It just goes to show how difficult it is to make your book visible to a US agent and then appealing to a US publisher, etc., etc. Obviously, when we tried selling 1,000+ pages book to a US publisher, and the book also deals with a Norwegian migrating to the US, so in many ways it's an immigrant novel, which we do have quite a few of these already. So hopefully the new one under Paving Stones will be an easier sell, not only because it's merely 973 pages, but at least it's a very different novel. But the reason I wanted to mention it is also because a lot of this novel was written in the beginning of my fascination with Pynchon. So there are all these references to Pynchon in the novel, and especially to Gravity's Rainbow. I mentioned to Cody in one of the emails that the layout of the book is exactly the same as Gravity's Rainbow, where the chapters are separated by these 7 squares that people used to think was meant to resemble film sprockets or something, but apparently it's not. But so the only difference is, in my book, these 7 squares are not. They are filled, so they're looking like paving stones. But there's all these small details, like, for instance, there's this guy, these teenagers, and this guy is visiting his girlfriend to be, and it's just a list of everything on her desk in her room. And after this long list of all the objects on her desk, it just says very Slothropian desk or something like that. Nice. Which of course is a reference to the description of Slothrop's desk in Gravity's Rainbow. And like 700 pages later, when he goes to visit her in France, where she studies, when he opens the door and is really surprised to see him, he just asks for directions to the Magöring casino or something. So there's a lot of playing around with that, and people asking about the Kenosha Kid and stuff.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I'd hope we can get a translation of that, because I would love to read it. I'm not afraid of a large book. I think anybody who listens to this show is more than willing to pick up 1,000+ page book. So
the good thing also, if I should, it's not an advertisement, but if I should brag about something which I really like with Norwegian government's view on literature, is that for how long is it? 30, 40 years, I don't know. We have this thing called NOLA, which stands for Norwegian Literature Abroad, which is government funding of translations. So if we should get a US publisher interested in the book, then NOLA will cover, from 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the translation cost.
Oh, wow.
Which makes it much more easy to buy the rights to and translate a 1,000-page book. Because obviously, if you don't have that, sort of ruin yourself doing it, and you would have to sell 100,000 copies to just break even. Mm-hmm. That has really changed Norwegian literature, I think, and made it somewhat known in different parts of the world, because we have this system, and we're really dependent on it as well, because we're a country that only 5.5 million people. So talking and writing in our own special secret language, so it's the only way to be able to get abroad.
Well, on that note, are there any Norwegian authors that you know of that have books in translation available outside of there that you would want to maybe give a shout out to or encourage our listeners to check out?
I think my first suggestion there would be this. I think I also mentioned to you earlier, Gunhild Haug. She's written both novels and short stories, and she's published in the US by FSG. And how should I describe her? It's quite strange in a way, but in a good way. She's hard to pitch. How should I say it? maybe I don't have to say anything. Maybe I just have to say you really should check it out. I will have to. Of course, it's difficult to mention a Norwegian writer's name with two because you don't even have in your alphabet. But let me see what else. Difficult because I'm not sure what's available in translation and not. But I mentioned earlier my friend Jon Erik Riley, who's part American and part Norwegian, and who's sadly not translated to English, and probably should be. His books are, for the most part, written in Norwegian, but a couple of his books just fluctuates between Norwegian and English quite seamlessly. And his biggest novel in many aspects of the word is called Heimdall, California, and it's a story about this Norwegian TV chef who has a mental breakdown, and the story goes back to him growing up in Northern California, and involves it's like eco-terrorism and one thing and the other. And it's very, he's probably also, I think, the Norwegian writer who's closest to Pynchon in style, without being any like a copycat or anything. But he shows that same level of freedom and willingness to work with different forms of literature, and it's equally extremely intelligent and also great fun. And he has, again, as Pynchon, he has this wonderful ability to keep changing from the like a high and low arts, or highbrow and lowbrow and all these things. He should really, I think you would really appreciate as well.
I'll have to see if I can find that. That sounds really interesting.
And then there's, of course, my neighbor, which happens to be one of the more probably the most known living Norwegian author, Dag Solstad. And since you are learning Norwegian, I think it's Lydia Davis who supposedly learned Norwegian to read him. I'm not sure how good she reads, but his books also are really something else. I should have written another list.
Well, if you think of any more, you can just email them to me, and I'll throw them in the show notes.
Yeah, sure.
I did want to ask regarding Buzz Aldrin, and I'll try to keep my questions here brief, because I think I'm the only one of us that has read it. I really loved it. I think I mentioned to you in one of our emails that it kind of sparked me back into writing. I was I had put it away for a while and just couldn't think of anything. And reading that book, I don't know what part of it or anything like that did that, but something just clicked with me and got me back into that. So thank you for that. Inadvertent though it was, that was a kind of a catalyst for me. But the book itself, I managed to find the TV adaptation of it on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious if you how much of a hand you had in that, and what your opinion of it was.
Yeah. Well, to start at the other end, I'm not sure if that stood the test of time. That miniseries, but no, that was made. I made a very wise, I think, decision early on that I would have nothing to do with it. And the reason for that is that I think if you're going to be involved with a movie adaptation or a TV series adaptation, you either have to have a lot of free time on your hands, or you have to be competent in the language of film or TV, and I didn't have either. So I told the director who also wrote the script, do whatever you want. Combine characters if you want to add stuff that's not in the book, do whatever you want. And I think that usually in like 9 out of 10 times makes the movie or series better, that they have that kind of freedom instead of the author sitting on their shoulders and what to do or not. Sure. So the only thing I did was I did go to the Faroe Islands, which is where the main part of the story takes place, while they were shooting, just because I wanted to see how our production looked like. And I found out that if you're involved with movie production at all, if you're just carrying something, you look very, very important. So I constantly found something to carry from A to B.
Yeah.
Became very important. But it's strange seeing your own things presented on the screen because the distance feels very, very big. So for me, it's almost a completely different story from what I wrote. I have some fond memories from the week or two I stayed while they were shooting. If you look really, really closely, I'm playing or pretending to play a synthesizer in a band in a scene.
I was going to ask if you popped in there at any point.
Yeah, but I don't have any lines. I'm just in the background.
Yeah.
But apparently, I'm overdoing it so much that I had to try to cut away from it as much as possible. To my defense, maybe I was moving too much with that synth, but it was 4 a.m. and I was really freezing. Where I've been waiting for 8 hours for them to shoot that stuff. But it's the same. It's the same experience I have with theater and stage plays.
Mm-hmm.
Where you write stuff, and I haven't written that many plays, but I've written 3 or 4, and a few of them have been produced either in Norway or in other countries. And it's very, very strange to sit in the audience and listen to your own text presented in a way that's very unfamiliar to you. And sometimes you have the joy of really feeling that that's really a good line. That's
Mhm.
pretty good. But for the most part, you feel just like you've been exposed. I think everyone can see how bad you really are. So I think the best thing is to sell the rights to your books or plays or whatever, and don't have a look at it.
Just don't engage with them. Yeah.
That sounds like the most likely way to spare yourself a lot of headache.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like the same thing. I decided also very, very early never to Google myself, and I did two things. I decided early on never to sign up with Facebook and never to Google myself. And I think if
that's fair, yeah.
all the other stuff I've done in my life is completely wrong, I think that's 2 choices I made that was really good. Yeah. This is also why I don't know about these reviews of the Red Hander. Because not to throw anyone under the bus, but the US publisher for that book hasn't really kept me up to speed on what's happening. Or not.
Oh, really? That's a shame. No, most of the reviews I read were spoke very highly of it. There was a couple that I saw that I was like, I think you missed the point almost entirely on this. But with Buzz Aldrin, the show was, I don't know. It was just something almost completely different. I felt like my wife watched it with me. She hasn't read the book, but she watched the show with me. Oh. And one thing I kind of kept saying was it needs to be a little bit longer. I think it was only 4 episodes, and it never really took the time that it could have to really examine the characters as much as the book does. And I felt like that it really fell flat because of that particular aspect of it. We didn't see Matthias grow. Annin/Sophia, it really didn't get as much growth. None of the other people that were there with him really got to grow in the same way that they did in the book. And I think that was one of my favorite things about the book was just the journey that he goes on, and then that time that he spends there when everyone else is gone for Christmas, and he dives into everyone else's backgrounds was just such a really fun part to read and heartbreaking too, because of the things that those characters went through, but really added so much depth to them and really made them so much more than their representations in the show. And I thought the show was cast well. I really liked the people that got to play those parts, and it had some really interesting ways of filming parts of it, like the conversations when people were on the phone. The way that was filmed was really interesting. But yeah, I felt like if it had a few more episodes to really flesh out those characters, it would have been a lot better.
There's a simple reason for all of this, and I'll tell you a couple of awfully fun stories. The simple reason has to do with money and the budget for the series, because the director insisted on the series being shot on film as opposed to on video.
Oh, digital.
Yeah, on digital. Yeah, so it's shot on Super 16mm, I think. or something like that. So that takes a lot of money processing that. And they had to cut a lot of stuff along the way. For instance, there's this scene where Carl, the American, who in the novel has this long story where he tells about being in Bosnia and watching the mass graves after the Srebrenica massacre, etc., etc. And in the book, this is, I don't know, maybe it's 10 pages or something. So for the series, the initial plan was to actually go to Srebrenica and shoot sequence there and have him walking around in that area. That became too expensive, so they decided, okay, we'll shoot it in Norway because you'll find forest that's quite similar to what you find in Bosnia. But then that became too expensive as well. So what they ended up with is just cutting his long monologue down to like a minute or something, and it's just him sitting on a dock.
Yeah.
In like a random place in the Faroe Islands, and you do that close zoom in. It's ridiculous. So it really destroys the whole thing. And the same characters. There's a sequence when he's in the water, and I can't remember. Yeah. And what's the name of the character? The actor. He was in the Wire. He had a small.
Oh, Chad Coleman.
Chad Coleman. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was really afraid of being in the water, understandably. So this is the North Atlantic in October or something. So really cold. So they had to use a stand-in. Probably found the only, black person in the Faroe Islands to be a stand-in. But the problem was the stand-in had no hair. So they needed a wig. But production said no, we can't afford a wig because a wig is like $150 or something. So they actually, I kid you not, they discussed using black sheep's wool instead.
Oh my god!
The guy's head. And then the director put his foot down and said, "I'll have none of it. You'll buy that damn wig." And I did end up buying a wig, but if you look at that scene, it's like it's the wig of shame. It's the cheapest, worst wig. It just looks ridiculous. So maybe the sheep's wool would have been better. No, but yeah, there's good things in the series, and there's other things that I think with more time and money, and also this came at a time where Norwegian film and TV production was at sort of on the threshold of moving into I wouldn't say more professional sphere, but I think Norwegian TV series and movies nowadays are looking more like American movies or European movies than they did when this came out 10, 15 years ago. In terms of how you block scenes, how you light scenes, etc. And there was also this thing, which again didn't have to do with money, but fairly early on in the series, there's this scene where they're on top of this mountain, not far from the city I'm from, a very well-known place in Norway, and it's like a 3,000 feet drop. It's very high peak, and there's this boulder jagged or in between two.
Oh yeah. It's wedged in there.
Yeah, wedged in. Yeah. So in the novel, the girl tells Matthias that she's leaving him while on this boulder, and the problem is that this is a place of nature, beauty, blah blah blah. So you can't really fly with a helicopter up there to shoot. I was giving the. I did it, but I ended up taking a lot of phone calls to governmental people trying to get permission to fly to get a helicopter going up there with the equipment, and we ended up not being allowed, so they had to shoot it on plates, which looks really fake. And I think like 2 or 3 years later, there was this Mission Impossible movie they wanted to shoot with Tom Cruise climbing on the same mountain, and they apparently had no problems getting being allowed. I think it was 200 helicopter sorties to that same place, and I couldn't get a single one.
It's
A little bit
crazy.
upset with that. So next time, I'll
Understandably.
yeah.
I wanted to ask about how you got interested in David Foster Wallace's work, as the resident sort of fanatic of his material on this show.
I think it started with his name just popping up in the very, like in 1999 or something, and he coming across a copy of Infinite Jest and buying it, and not being sure what to do with it really. And I think it again has to do with my Norwegian American friend who introduced me to Pynchon. Also, he's been my gateway to a lot of contemporary American writers. But and this sort of backtracks to a conversation we had in the last episode about the accessibility of Pynchon, because I had that same feeling with Wallace in the beginning as well, that Infinite Jest was really, really hard to get into. And I had heard from people who had read it that, you have to get through the first 200 pages or something, and then it will start to make sense.
Yeah.
And I do remember when I started reading Infinite Jest, like the first 150 pages or so are slightly confusing. And then once you get it into it, it really flows. But this is where it gets interesting, at least to me, because I think it was Kate who said that Against the Day doesn't feel that difficult, but it could be because we've been reading Pynchon now for 2 years straight. Because now when I reread Infinite Jest, it's completely, I can't understand why it's so difficult, because it starts, it's all there on the first page where Al is in the office and having his fit, and it's not difficult to get into at all. So maybe it just has to do with having been exposed to that kind of writing for a while. Obviously, having read the whole book makes it easier to understand what happens in the beginning.
True enough.
But I do like how that doors into literature open, and then once they're open, you can't even remember how it used to be when they were closed. But for both these writers, both Wallace and Pynchon, who I think, when you combine them, then they really create this gargantuan force of talent and compassion, especially with Wallace. But it's a little bit sad to think that most people will never read these authors, because, especially I think with Pynchon, because there's no real room in literature anymore, at least for the general population, to read those books. I mean, when Gravita's Rainbow came out in 1973, it was quite popular. It sold a lot of copies, and I think you probably know this way better than me, but I think it's like the paperback sold a couple of millions in the first 2 or 3 years, which also sounds impossible now if you would publish a book like that.
Yeah, that's true.
I think a lot of that could be tied to just the I don't want to say the proliferation of the internet itself, but I think that the culture has moved in such a way that I think people are less willing to engage with something that's going to take a long time. And so if you set a book in front of somebody that's 700, 800, 900 pages, the likelihood of them being willing to spend the time that it takes to read that book, as opposed to just putting on Netflix and binging a show or doing whatever. Obviously, I think a lot of people nowadays are going to gravitate to the easier thing, but I think there is something of a resurgence, I guess, in people picking up books and getting more into them. And I think in a weird way, it kind of starts with social media, because you have all these people who are on various social media platforms that are talking about books, and whether or not I could talk for a long time about the sincerity with which they are reviewing these books and how much time they're actually spending with them. Regardless of that, I think there's enough people that can start there at least and start getting back into reading if they gave it up for a while, or just get into it if they hadn't really ever gotten into it before, and then can kind of progress and find the joy in doing that and start to get into those more challenging books. And so hopefully that acts as a sort of gateway to more people to really pick up books and to be more willing to take the time to appreciate these works rather than just mindlessly having the TV on while you're really just scrolling on your phone or doing any other number of things.
Yeah, I hope you're right, and nothing would be better. Sort of reaction against it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes both ways. I had a good example of both of that in the cafe I work in just this past week, where one, very consistently I see a lot of people in the cafe for hours at a time reading, which is great. That always makes me really happy to see. But then when some of the coworkers I have were talking about to the TikTok ban happening in the US, one of them very loudly went, "What am I supposed to do now? Start reading books?" in like a
Jesus.
very aggrieved way that was very disheartening.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
You'll see TikTok will probably be up and running in about 48 hours.
Oh, they've
Yeah.
it's already headed that direction. Yeah, it's yeah.
No, it's already back up. I was on it earlier
Is it really?
today.
Jesus, yeah, I'm not
Okay.
surprised.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to talk with you about we've talked a little bit in our emails with each other about your interest in punk music, and you got me onto this really cool Russian band whose name I am not even going to try pronouncing because I don't think I have an English equivalent of it. But I'll leave a link to them in the show notes because they're really cool. They've been around since I think it was like the 80s, and they've got a ton of albums that I could find and really interesting sound. But you also mentioned you met Bob Mould at a certain point, which is mind blowing for me. I'm big fan of Hüsker Dü and a lot of his solo stuff. So I'm curious, what is the punk scene like in Norway and even a little further out, like in Scandinavia in general?
I'm not sure if misleading is the correct word, but I've never been that. I've never been a punk expert or really that into punk music as such. It has more to do with I enjoy some of these bands, but it has more to do with the fact that I was more or less forced into this post-punk band many years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was like manhandled into playing drums for this band, which I don't know why. All the songs were in German, and we decided that we would only rehearse if we had a gig, and we only played in Germany. So we didn't rehearse a lot, but we did get to play. The final show we did was in the middle of like an airport in Berlin called Tempelhof. So we played from a trailer in the middle of the airport for an audience of 12, I think.
I've been there countless times. So
of whom 8 probably were our friends.
Yep.
I remember my jeans splitting on the first song, and like ripped open. But hey, it's punk, so you just go with it. Let it all hang loose. And the singer, his voice broke, or it just went out the window like half through the show, but we just kept going. And again, it's hazy at best, but as I remember it, when we were finished, we just left all the gear on stage or on the trailer and just walked away, and we turned around, and a couple of climbed on stage, picked up the instrument, and started like an empty cover band of what we had done. That was a beautiful moment. No, the thing, and this probably has to do with why I behaved as I did with Hüsker Dü or with Bob Mould as well, because I tried so hard for so many years to get into punk music, and I have quite a few friends who really loves it, and especially my French translator is punk music aficionado, and I've been able to at times to tap into it, but I feel I get kicked out again after a while. I don't know why, but Yeah, so with Bob Mould, just to mention it, since you bringing it up, I don't know why, but when I grew up, Hüsker Dü was a band that the people who were 5 or 6 or 7 years older than me, they were listening to Hüsker Dü. For me, it was just a very, very strange band name, because I couldn't, for the life of me, understand why an American band would have a Norwegian or Danish sounding name.
Mhm.
I remember when I was doing a book tour in the US for Wetzel, and I was with my publisher in New York, and they said, "Oh, by the way, when you're going to Minneapolis, you'll an event with Bob Mould," and everyone at the publishing house was, "Wow, that's great, man." And I was like, "Okay," and I didn't know who it was. So on the way, I of course understood that, okay, he's the guy from Hüsker Dü. Well, this is also 10, 15 years ago, so I'm trying to remember if it was because I was shy or if whatever it was, but I was sort of the warm-up act for Bob Mould, presenting my book, and for a packed audience in the bookstore in Minneapolis. And obviously everyone had come there for him, for his autobiography. But he was so kind to me, and we had a long chat beforehand, and afterward he said to me something to the effect of like, "Well, so now let's go and have a couple of beers, right?" And I told him, "Nah, I don't know, I think I'll have to go back to the hotel." So I turned him down. I think in the cab back to the hotel, I really started regretting it.
Yeah.
And so what happened, this was fairly early on in the writing of the novel that became Max Mich and the Tet Offensive. But what happened was I started really listening to Hüsker Dü, and so a lot of Hüsker Dü references ended up in the book. And so, for instance, one of the main characters, this girl named Misha, she's first introduced in the novel. She's wearing this Hüsker Dü T-shirt, and I think one of the chapters is called New Day Rising, and there's quite a lot of these references all over the place, because and especially the New Day Rising album became, for me at least, partly a soundtrack for writing the book. By which I mean that I'm always listening to music when I'm writing.
Mhm.
So I was listening to a lot of Hüsker Dü, and a tremendous amount of Sonic Youth Daydream Nation, I remember.
Nice.
So whenever I hear those records, I always think of writing that book. And now I'm digressing, really, but I have this with all my books. So, for instance, since we were talking about Buzz Aldrin, I can remember I was listening to a lot of, this Icelandic band called Sigur Rós.
Oh, I love Sigur Rós. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great.
So that was the band I was listening to a lot when I was writing Buzz Aldrin. It's sort of all these musical connections to it, and with Under the Paving Stones was the Canadian band Godspeed You Black Emperor,
Oh,
which I
excellent.
listened
Ooh.
to intensely.
Yeah.
So when the Spotify, the annual, I have this
The wrap-up
statistics
thing, yeah.
The wrap-up thing. I was like the 0.01% top listeners of Godspeed You Black Emperor. You probably have talked about this in one of the episodes. I've tried to listen to them all, but since they're so long, I can't remember everything. But you are, of course, aware of the Against the Day album. That what's this band called?
Land of Kush.
Land of Kush.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I found it because they were on the same label as Godspeed You Black Emperor.
It's one of the members of that band too. His solo
it is.
project.
The bass player, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started listening to that as well. Unrelated to anything, but since I'm just have turned on my motor mouth here. With apart from doing from writing, I do a bit of graphic design and sometimes also visual art. So when Godspeed was playing in Oslo, I think it was last year, I was asked by the Norwegian promoter to to do the like the Norwegian tour poster for them. I did this silk screen poster for the band, which they was sold, I think, at shows in Norway, and the band ended up taking a bunch with them back to Canada, which is strange, but it's things like that that really connects to the teenager in me. You know, that like you can get a great review for a book and you can maybe be given an award or something. But if a band you're really into knows something you've done or something, or appreciates something you've done, it means so much more. So I was I was really proud of that, because I really think they're a great band.
Yeah, they are. Phenomenal band. So I know you mentioned playing music yourself. Do you still play at all?
No, I really don't, and I kind of miss it, because I've only been able to play drums, and I was never really good, but I think I was okay at best, and I think that if I've stuck with it and kept working on it, I could probably be okay plus or something. And but I had a lot of fun just playing, and for me, especially with drums, it's a great way of getting out kinds of emotions.
Oh yeah.
So I miss that, but I don't know. We've been talking a lot about it for the last few years, that if this post-punk band of us should come back to life, it should come back as a country western band or something.
Really shake things up.
Yeah.
To shake things up, yeah. It'll be just be depressing country songs or something.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah, I play drums myself, and there was a good chunk of time from like just after college when I had been in a band, and just for what I can't even remember why I stopped doing it, and I just stopped playing entirely up until a few years ago. I got an electric kit, and I had forgotten how cathartic playing could be. It just to just get there and sit behind the kit for an hour or so and just really wail away at everything. Yeah, it feels great. It's good exercise. It's like it's cardio exercise, I guess. And you just really can process through a lot of stuff. And so yeah, hopefully you can pick it back up. And if your band gets back together, I would love to hear your country renditions of all those songs.
I will definitely keep you posted if we get back together. Yeah.
Speaking of music, I wanted to touch real quick to go back to Buzz Aldrin. Are the Cardigans aware of their presence in that book? Because it looms large.
Good question. I think so, because at some point there was talk about the role of Sophia, and then to be played by the singer from the Cardigans.
Oh, really?
Nina Persson.
Yeah.
So 100% sure if she were in discussions with her, but as I remembered, I think they were, and that she turned it down for some reason. That novel has also created a lot of problems for me, because as I told you earlier, I'm not really a big fan of the Cardigans.
Yeah.
Understandably, a lot of people thought I were, since I wrote so much about them, and in such a positive way. So over the years, I've had a lot of people being quite from upset to being just a little bit sad that I'm not a big fan. But at the same time, I feel I have to be honest and say that I chose them because I felt it would be the perfect music for a psychiatric patient.
Yeah.
Because the thing with the Cardigans, and especially this was, this novel was written in the very early 2000s, and at that time, at least, Cardigans felt like a band that were a little bit too experimental to be a pure pop band, but at the same time too pop to be an art band. So they're kind of really hard to put in a category, I think, which made them interesting.
Mhm.
And they're also just a sweet band. But I learned from that mistake that if I'm putting music into my books, I have to know what I'm doing.
Sure.
So it's easier with the Hüsker Dü references.
Yeah.
And of course the Russian punk band you mentioned earlier, which I just stumbled across, and I think they were, as far as I know, they were the first punk band in Russia,
That's interesting.
in Siberia, of all places, and they came into existence just as Soviet Union was starting to look the other way, and when people were doing things that they would normally have sent the KGB to stop them from. One can only imagine how those people, how much effort they had to put in to be able to get records from Europe or from the US shipped to the middle of Siberia without anyone finding out. I know at least they did that quite an extent in East Germany, smuggling in records without anyone knowing about it.
I would imagine that'd be a really difficult thing to do. It's kind of a tall order. Those are big things to have to find a way to smuggle in. But I guess
They're heavy too. Once you have more than 10 of them.
Yeah. I guess where there's a will, there's a way.
Maybe just had to know some people at the post office, or maybe
that's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so since we've gone back to Buzz Aldrin, I guess I don't know if you've heard. I honestly don't know how much Cody has let get into the public releases about our secret plans to get rich making this very niche podcast and retire to the Faroe Islands. Since you at least had to visit there for the filming of the show, it sounds like any advice? You think it's a good idea? You think that it would be a good choice for the four of us in four different places in our lives to just move to the Faroe Islands? Do you think that's a good place to change things up?
And that would shake things up. That's always a good place. The thing is that it's really great there. It's because there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little bit better now. From what I've heard, they've more or less made the place into an Instagram photo opportunity place. But when I was there last, and I went there quite a few times, because when I grew up, my best friend, his mother was from the Faroe Islands, so I always heard about this place like almost like a fantasy island or something. A place where every fall he would come back from summer vacation and he would look twice as pale as everyone else because he didn't stay at the Faroe Islands the whole summer. It was fog and rain like 364 days a year or something.
Uh-huh.
But staying there, I've hardly felt more welcomed anywhere. It does something to you when there's nothing to do. There's nothing you're missing out of. Because nothing is really happening. At that time, they had like one good bar, and it was a really great bar. It had almost this saloon, like Western quality, where it had these. There was a second story which had this opening down to the ground floor. And late in the evening, the people upstairs would throw beer down on you for no reason whatsoever. And if you went there at the Olavsøka, which is the national holiday in the Faroe Islands, which is like their 4th of July, only a 2-day thing. Back in the old day, you could bring your own drinks into a bar, but you were only allowed one container. So say if you had 2 beers and a vodka or something, what they did was just got a container or other, and you poured everything into the same container and just shook it really bad, and then went inside to drink your own cheap beer vodka mix or whatever. Yeah, no, I think that's a good plan. You can come to Norway. You're always welcome here.
I would love to come to Norway. Yeah, I've always had this weird like fascination with the Scandinavian countries and have been drawn to the art and the culture that exists out there. And so as my Norwegian gets better, maybe I'll feel more comfortable, going over there and
it would be
interacting.
Sort of a pilgrimage. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And then you can show the rest of your family what they could have had if they just kept it up.
That's right. I could purposely mistranslate things just to throw them off and send them on wild journeys.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the Faroe Islands has always seemed like, because my wife and I have both had a numerous conversations about like, what if we just packed up everything and just went there? Because it seems like it's one of the kind of last, I don't want to say untouched places, but it doesn't seem like it's been as affected by modern life as so much of the rest of the world has. So it seems like it would be a good place to just kind of like slow down and not really, like you said, have to do anything, just kind of be there.
I think probably you could get that at parts of Iceland as well.
Probably.
Yeah, which I have to be honest and say that Iceland, it's easier on the eye than the Faroe Islands.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's more scenic and prettier in some ways. Plus, of course, there should probably be some Iceland spa there, shouldn't there? You can pick up. Yeah.
I actually may be there next summer, so I have plans on finding some. Yeah.
Yeah. Or one day soon probably you'll get Greenland as well. So we'll just see if you can have that.
Genuinely curious how people in Greenland are reacting to all of this nonsense.
You can go watch the Conan thing the last time Trump threatened to do this. He
that's
flew
true.
out there just to talk to him.
Yeah.
Was that on the most recent thing he did?
No, that was when he was still just doing the Conan show.
Oh, he's just on. Okay, because the travel documentary he did was really good. He went to Norway. That was, I think, the first episode.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that was a fun watch.
It's always hard for me to watch Norwegians interact with people in general.
I'm sure it's more interesting when it's someone like Conan too, who's prone to really playing up his persona and getting a rise out of people.
I never feel we show ourselves from our good side. But there's this other thing as well, which is quite funny, having to do with Norway being such a small country, and maybe it's not as much now as it 30 years ago. If Norway at all was just mentioned by anyone in another country, it was like, oh, they know about us. Especially if it was the US. And I'm thinking about this since you did the Lynch episode. But I'll tell you, back in, when was this? 1990, when the first episode of Twin Peaks aired. And they're up at the I don't remember the name of the hotel.
Oh, the Great Northern?
The Great Northern. And they had this meeting with the Norwegians.
Oh, yes.
And, and there's even a guy speaking Norwegian there, and he speaks he has some very strange words. But I think all of Norway went just like, oh, they know about us.
We're famous.
We're famous. We feel so appreciated for a moment.
Yeah. That's it. It's really,
that's a feeling you will never have of being.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. America has made itself so well known everywhere that there's just there's nothing left for us to hide anymore.
No.
Yeah, but I was always, and I guess I need to dive more into Norwegian cinema if you have any good recommendations, because Lynch was kind of my stepping stone into a lot of, weirdly enough, a lot of foreign films. Because from him, I went to like Jodorowsky and more specifically to Ingmar Bergman, and really got into his work, and especially stuff like Persona, An Hour of the Wolf, and Winter's Light. Is there any can you think of any specific Norwegian like directors or films that kind of have that same sort of Lynchian feel, or that same what Bergman was doing in parts of his career, that surrealist kind of thing?
I'm not sure. I will have to think about that and probably get back to you. But what I do feel is that in some sense, both Denmark with Ingmar Bergman, Sweden with Ingmar Bergman, and Denmark with Lars von Trier, they have these big stars that we haven't really gotten there in Norway yet, and there's probably a lot of reasons for it, having to do with what the Swedes and the Danes being quicker to set up the production community, or whatever you want to call it. But things are changing, I feel, in Norway, and there are a couple of upcoming directors that are finally getting some mentioning abroad. What's their name? It's the one that was an Oscar nomination, I think. Was it last year? I can't remember, but there's a couple of names that I think will perhaps be be more well known in a few years. But like Ingmar Bergman, the odds of that. He's sort of one of a kind, along with Kubrick or Tarkovsky or those kind of figures.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that. We have his daughter, writer Linn Ullmann.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very famous Norwegian writer, and I read the other day. I got this. It's from Talkin. Have you seen this? It's a 2-volume set of the making of Kubrick's The Shining. It's just out. It's like $100 or something. It's 1,396 pages in total about the making of The Shining, and it's if just to look at it, it's a great work of art. These books, but anyway, in it. This talk about that Liv Ullmann was considered for Shelley Duvall's part in The Shining.
Interesting. That would have been.
I would like to have seen that movie.
Yeah,
because Jack Nicholson would have killed her in the first 5 minutes, I think. He just couldn't take it.
I'm curious how Kubrick would have handled her, given his sort of notoriety for the way he dealt with his actresses.
Maybe
that's why she didn't get it. Yeah.
That could be.
To circle back to Red Handler,
Yep.
Is there any particular detective like writer or kind of like hard-boiled writer that you're kind of particularly into, or that had more influence than anyone else on that book in particular, or was it more of just like kind of a culmination of all of that genre?
It was definitely more a combination of all of them. I think I read most of my crime fiction when I was fairly young. That was in a way my way into literature, was reading crime fiction, and I really, really loved it. And there were a couple of Norwegian ones who are really, really good. I feel one of them is called Gunnar Staalesen. He's from Bergen. One of the most known crime fiction writers in Norway. And I had read a little bit of Nesbø, who's sort of the most known Norwegian fiction writer nowadays. But most of this was just me remembering how it used to sound, and then almost just leafing through different crime fiction books to set the tone for it. So actually, funny enough, the biggest influence on the Red Handler is Nabokov's Pale Fire, which of course is just a poem, and then all the end notes explaining the poem. So my take on it was to make the Red Handler the drunk uncle of Nabokov's Pale Fire. But it's really important to say, a few critics also thought I was taking the piss with crime fiction writers, and I've never been a writer that's down on any genre or whatever people are doing. I mean, people are reading, that's a good thing. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care if they're reading like whatever it is. They don't have to read Pynchon at all. As long as you read, you're thinking, you're spending, you're concentrating on something by yourself. So it was just that crime fiction was an easy target because that's where the money is. I needed my writer in the book, the Frode Brandeggen. I needed him to be bitter about not making money as a writer, because for the most of us, it's a struggle to actually make a living out of it, to be able to live as a writer and not having a job on the side, and that seems to be getting harder by year. But it was great fun to write. I really, really enjoyed writing that book, and that probably shows as well, I think.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you were having a good time putting it together, and it was, like I said, it was a pleasure to read it as a result. Kate, Luke, Will, did any of y'all have any more questions?
I was going to ask about any Pale Fire influence on Red Handler, so I'm glad that you you proffered that up of your own volition.
Yeah.
It strikes me as really funny that people, because I have not read the book. It is on my short list of books to get around to. When Cody sent a picture of the back cover,
Yeah.
my first thought was like, okay, this person is either accidentally fallen into the exact same state of mind that clearly led to Pale Fire, or is directly responding in some way.
Yeah.
I find it really funny that it seems like some people are getting offended on behalf of crime fiction authors when it's like, okay,
Oh yeah.
do you think that Pale Fire was an indictment of poetry, or do you think
Yeah.
maybe
Exactly.
there might be something more nuanced going on here?
This is kind of the problem where we're headed. That if people don't reflect for more than 10 seconds, this is what you end up with. It's just like that. There's actually hidden somewhere in the Red Handler. There's a quote from Pale Fire, which in Pale Fire also, as I remember, it just shows up at a random point where he's talking about something, and suddenly there's the line. There's a very large amusement park close to my building, or like that. And that sentence in Norwegian is just thrown into the book at some random place. So if it's translated in the English correctly, it should read just as in the original Pale Fire. So at least 1 in a million will catch the reference.
Yeah, I didn't have any questions, actually. I did want to throw out there that the Red Handler is probably, along with Catch-22 and A Confederacy of Dunces, probably like top 3 funniest books I've ever read. I think I laughed out loud like 7 times. I recently read No One Is Talking About This, which is a pretty funny book. I don't know if any of y'all have read that one. It came out in the last like 4 or 5 years, and it got a lot of awards buzz. I only laughed out loud at that one once. I laughed out loud at The Red Handler 7 times. There's particularly a part in The Red Handler where you describe like the fictional author, like in his first book, like he like it's something I'm probably gonna butcher it, but it's something where like he had made it from his car. He hadn't made it from his car to the door. He like made it to the car from his door like in 150 pages or something.
Oh yeah.
That like as a writer myself, who like sometimes will, not be super into writing excited. I can get kind of lost in my own thoughts and stuff. It just made me laugh just so much just because like
Thank you.
yeah, imagining the reading experience of reading that fictional book and all of that stuff in The Red Handler was just very, very amusing to me.
I really appreciate that. And I should also mention, since we've been on the topic of translation, that I'm really happy with the translation of this one as well. It feels very, very close to the original, and translator David Smith has been very kind in carefully translating a lot of stuff that would otherwise have just been lost, I think, in translation.
It's extremely funny imagining somebody trying to translate a book inspired by Pale Fire, just not giving it much thought. Shame the joke didn't happen, but I'm glad for the sake of your work.
Yeah.
Well, Johan, thank you so much for coming and talking to us both about Against the Day and everything else that we were able to talk about. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really genuinely hope that we can get some more of your books over here and out in other parts of the world, because I think more of the world needs these books. They're a great pleasure, and I hope that I can get more. And thank you also for sending me what you sent in Norwegian, and that's, I'm looking forward to diving into those and really trying to get a better grip on the language and finally be able to parse through and enjoy those books, and hopefully, like I said, at some point we'll get translations of those as well. And hopefully at some point, once you finish the book, of course, let us know what you thought, or if you want to come back on at any point during any other part of it, we'd love to have you back on and keep talking to you about it. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. I mean, the pleasure is all mine. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and it's just been been a great time. As a big fan of the podcast, as you know, I was listening to you all way before you did the Red Handler episode. So for me, it's just been a treat to be able to come on the show and speak to you about this. And also, you know, there's not that many people around me that I can discuss Pynchon with without them looking for the exit. So
The pain I know all too well. Yes.
Yeah, you've stumbled upon why the show exists.
yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to keep reading the novel, but staying with you from episode to episode. So I might take you up on that offer as we come closer to the end of the book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Say no. Yeah.
We'll always be happy to have you on and talk Pynchon and everything else with you.
Thank you so much.